All right. That was the end of racism. Finally, I'm glad we did it, folks. We all did it. Everybody did their part. Didn't know what to call this. It was originally just going to be about reparations. Instinctively, it seems just like a silly idea. 160 years later, people that had nothing to do with it are paying people that had nothing to do with it based on some sort of calculation they're going to come up with about melanin content versus how long they've lived here. And I wonder if they're going to do that for everyone else. Like if you're some Scandinavian guy who arrived here in the 80s and your family had no part of slavery, should you really be taxed at the rate, the rest of us guilty slave-owning whites will be taxed at? That doesn't seem fair. So it's just a whole can of worms that's just more of the same problem. And honestly, I think the real problem is the government handout. It's 160 years since slavery. At just simply, that's 8 generations. I'm sorry, in this country, 8 generations of any singular path of poverty. I think the collective individual of those 8 generations is to blame at that point. In 8 generations, if I can't imagine what the kids I'm going to have, the great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandkids I'm going to have, or if my bloodline survives, I can't even imagine what their lives would be like. But how much of what they have then would be based on what I have now? It's absurd to think that they should be related in any way whatsoever. In one generation, the children of parents X, Y, and Z, in one generation in this country, you can turn it around. And it has nothing to do with race. There is no barrier to any race turning it around in one generation. It's not about race. Collectively, individuals have their own stories, and I could see 8 generations of certain kinds of individuals raised a certain way in a pattern of inept parenting. I think a lot of it has to do with the parent-child thing. I don't think there's a lot of guidance, control being put on youths, the teens, all the teens out there that are in the news. I'm just speaking about teens in general. Teens in general, they just need to be reined in because they're so rampant. It's a risky one, tackling race. I feel like anybody that talks about race at all, anyone by anyone, I mean anyone not of the sanctioned crowd of people allowed to talk about race. I mean any white person that talks about race, it's automatically got eyebrows raised. Wait, a white person's going to say something about race? Up go the eyebrows. Let's just see what he's got to say. Or she. Could be a woman. Let's get ready, everybody. Because one tiny slip-up and he is going down. Honestly, the word for it is hateful kind of targeting. It's nuts that in 8 generations, if 8 generations out, you're saying the reason you haven't gotten out of poverty or you're saying it's racism? No way, man. No. People overcome pogroms, becoming orphans, families dying in fires. I gotta think a kid whose family dies in a fire, or let's say the family's wiped out in some horrible genocidal cleansing, you can turn that around in a generation or 2. I don't want to have to be the anecdotal case to prove it. We all have a certain benefit of living in not just our privilege that we get in this country, but living in a modern society where access to healthcare, food, shelter is so readily available and so provided by the state for those who can't cut it. And if generationally you're not cutting it, well, it's personal stuff at that point. Otherwise, it is your race. And I don't mean it's because of your race that you're being held back, but there's something about your race that somehow can't seem to get this done. You've been in this country however many generations, 8 generations. What kind of parent would you have been? What kind of provider would you have been if 8 generations out from your children right now, they were living like the lowest classed people in their country, the poorest, the most needy of others' welfare and charity and state intervention, just so their kids can survive. If 8 generations from now, my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great grandkids were living in squalor and poverty, still, then it's not the system. It's just generationally people not taking care of themselves, making the right choices, living like adults, living like, responsible people who have self-determination, agency. I don't know. Racism. I was going to have a commercial break in the video, and it was going to be the I can't believe it's not blackface facial cream. The I can't believe it's not blackface facial cream is it goes on. It feels exactly like you're wearing blackface, but it goes on clear. So you get the feeling of blackface without any of the fuss. You know what I mean? It feels, I can't believe it. I put this on, it feels exactly like blackface. And you get the joy of wearing blackface, which if like you're into like really creepy, weird, kinky stuff and you want to kick it up a notch, I imagine doing blackface would do that. That might, like if you showed up at some creepy, some sort of creepy orgy where, people of all different genders are doing all kinds of weird stuff with midgets. The thing that's beyond the pale, literally, would be to go to one of those and do all your crazy, creepy, poop-involving nonsense, but do it in blackface and see how long it would be till somebody came up and said, "Hey, come on, man. We're not weirdos here. You're weird. You got to go." So I can't believe it's not blackface. It's got all the sort of the pizzazz and joy and sort of, you got to feel electric if you're wearing blackface because it's so taboo. It must be exhilarating to finally wear blackface because, as you know, because it's the most racist thing in the world you can possibly do, then we almost seriously want to do it. It's like the N-word. There's this thing like, oh, white people just want to say the N-word. It's like, no, it's not that big a deal. And if I wanted to say it, I would. Blackface, same thing. Oh my God, blackface is so abhorrent. I cannot believe it. But deep in the heart of these white people is this racism that can't let blackface go. No. Nobody wants to do blackface. Nobody cares about blackface. I think it's funny. I'm wearing blackface right now, actually. But it's a podcast, so it doesn't count. I'm not gonna ask for the points one would get for wearing blackface. But trust me, I've put on shoe polish all over my face. That's what it was like when I was a kid, though. I came from a large family. My father was a coal miner. But every Halloween, we didn't have money for costumes. He'd hand me the shoe polish and say, "You know what to do." And I did. I put it on my face, and I looked like Dad, the coal miner, who came home with coal dust on his face every day. Now that would be considered a blackface atrocity. So that's why there's, I can't believe it's not blackface cream. I may still do that as a commercial parody for funsies to put on the 60-second versions, the shorts. Another idea I had would be a great product. It's like a facial cream, and if you're playing a prank on somebody, you would only do this to someone you hate or you wanted to destroy or just have an awesome prank. It's a facial cream that you buy, and it goes on clear, but once it's exposed to ultraviolet rays or sunlight, in about an hour, it bronzes and then turns really dark brown and then just kind of looks like coal. And you give it to someone as a gift, and they use it, and they go into work. By the time their commute's over and they go in there, they walk in, and first everyone's gasping. And, she thinks it's because she looks radiant and has a glow. But no, she's got blackface on. And how do you explain that? You don't. Boy, you don't understand. Get out. Here's your box. Get out. And now everybody gets to sort of grandstand and look at you with shame and scorn. They knew it all along that you were a racist. You walked in with blackface. It'd be a great way to destroy somebody. Just blackface cream. Of course, wearing blackface right now, I understand that it might offend some of you, but I'm just trying not to get it on the microphone. That's my goal tonight. If I can get through this without getting my blackface on the microphone. This is true. I have a buddy whose grandfather, my buddy's older than me, and his grandfather was a musician, a touring musician. He was originally from Arkansas, I think. But he could play any stringed instrument. He could play the mandolin, the violin, the banjo, the guitar. If it had strings on it, he could play it. And this is way back when it was in the 30s or whatever. And he was part of it. He was part of a touring review, like live acts and dancers, And but their train, there was an accident. One of their lead actors got crushed between the trains or something like that, and got his leg damaged. And in one of those sort of show must go on kind of moments, they knew either they all divided up that guy's parts and took roles that he was supposed to do in the review, or they were all going home. They would have no money. And because he was the wizard on the strings, he had to do the blackface minstrel act with the banjo. He would have to put that stuff on his face, and he knew even then, and he felt terrible doing it. It made him upset, but he had to do it. He had to do it for the sake of the troupe. He had to do the part, and he felt it made him cry a couple times. It made him very upset. At least once he threw up before he went on stage. He hated being black. Just hated it. Oh, it was the worst experience in the world for him. He's like, oh my God, I look like I'm black. And it just made his stomach churn, and he hated it. That should be enough about blackface. This one wasn't particularly fun to make. Although, I gotta say, cutting the John Lennon song, not the song, but the woman is the N-word of the world segment, it was originally going to be one joke, but by the time I got to that point in the production, I have such a crappy software, and my computer was glitching and freezing and taking a minute to do the slightest little adjustments to the edit. And it was while I was trying to cut that, and it just kept freezing and stuff, almost like it was trying to stop me from doing the bit. Like it was demonstrating the good sense, trying to tell me, the universe was trying to say, hey, don't do this bit, man. It's just going to cause you trouble. There was a little bit of that, but it was also just kind of funny that like there's some sort of AI that's, no, this is more than that, man. This is much more. You're on the internet right now. You're dialed in with all the main supercomputers in the world that are tracking everything you do, and all this stuff is being monitored. And it knows if some guy somewhere out in Colorado is recording something on his laptop, and he's about to say, he's a white guy, and he's about to say the N-word, it glitches your software. This is Silicon Valley. They've been working on this software for a while, and they're going to have AI do it now. It's going to be monitoring everything you do on your computer to make sure you're not racist, to make sure you're not a white guy about to say the N-word. The funny thing was, having to not, I didn't actually say the word. I would say the first half and chop it and cut it, because I would never say that word. But the software was really working. It was really stopping me from doing that bit. Thanksgiving, by the way, today. Happy Thanksgiving. All you people out there. Not just the fans and the subscribers, but all you people out there. Happy Thanksgiving. I have definitely partaken in the overeating festival that is a holiday of bounty and brotherhood and family. It's a great holiday. Even if it's nothing more than just getting together with all your family and eating. Two things I don't want on Thanksgiving. I don't want to watch a football game. I just don't care. You enjoy the football game? Go enjoy it. Great. And I don't want to talk politics. And not that I am averse to it, but when some people talk politics, it always just turns the room ugly. It just makes things, kind of hostile, and it ruins the holiday. Hey, it's a holiday. Maybe today don't talk politics with your right-wing uncle or your trans nephew. Just let it go. It's a holiday. You're going to have a meal. Everyone's going to make bad choices. Don't make it something to fight about. And to all the people that want to get rid of Thanksgiving, you know what? You probably need to spend more time with your family. You might need Thanksgiving more than anybody else. And I don't mean that you need to be exposed to their scorn or their lectures or whatever it is that, you and your family fight about. But it's because your family's messed up that you're feeling the way you do about a pretty good holiday. Oh, but what about the genocide? Really? Really? Do you care, really? I know you say you care, but you don't care about the people around you. If someone's wearing a red hat, the venomous hatred that, honestly, that I see more coming from the left towards the right, venomous, not just hatred or disdain, but like there's almost like a psychosis to the hatred that people on the left, my good brethren, sistren, that they have for the right. They feel so morally justified in it that it gives them sort of that crusader devotion, but at none of the cost. I mean, is there an easier opinion to espouse right now than your sort of neo-Marxist beliefs on society, culture, media, race relations. It's endless. Their venom towards people who just think, hey, maybe that 52-year-old gay guy in a dress shouldn't be disrobing and reading books to children. He wants to do that in a club for people that'll pay to see it even. Good for him. He's found a way to make a buck that I could never figure out. Let's keep it away from the kids till the kids actively go stumble upon it and decide whether or not they like what they're seeing. You can convince a kid to like anything, literally anything. See the child soldiers in Africa walking through villages like zombies, just blasting anything that moves and then hanging out later with their buds. Good thing we don't have that in this country, but the child soldiers in Africa are the proof that you can convince a kid to do anything. Anything. And you work them right, they can do it without remorse. They can do it out of a sense of unreality. I think our youth today, I think they have that sort of immortality thing combined with an immorality. I'm immortal, I'm going to live forever. Or if I don't live forever, I'm going to go out, in a blaze of glory. And because of that, because that's the way life is, I don't need morality. Who has time for morality? Morality's for suckers. So it's a lack of understanding their mortality and having no grounding for their morality. That's what's wrong with our teens today. All the teens that are committing crimes. I love the code. These are unhoused. These teens are going to be unhoused pretty soon. I hope somebody points that out. That all these teens that are getting into trouble, stealing cars, those are going to be our unhoused of the future. Or they'll be in prison. I don't know how you live past a certain age if that's the culture you want to live in. Making it to your 40s, like that's an accomplishment for the teens of today. It's very hard to have a take on it that isn't immediately divisive. Sort of like Israel and Hamas, particularly for a person of non-color. People of color can do whatever they want, but it's very much just, again, all eyes are on you. If not to condemn you and destroy you, to just make a judgment about you, to understand, or to sort of label you or pigeonhole you in their eyes, or anyone's eyes, the public's eyes. Everyone is terrified of being labeled racist. Perhaps even more so, I don't know, I'm speculating now, but even more so than what might have felt being called a communist in the 50s. Communist in the 50s, there was also an element of, yes, I'm a communist. I feel like the worker should own the means of production and that the corrupt capitalists are exploiting the classes and pitting them against blah, blah. You can honestly believe that, And so I would imagine there were communists who were persecuted in the 50s, American communists, of whatever sort of level of understanding you might ascribe to them, it doesn't matter. There were American communists, but they had an ideological sort of standpoint that they could proudly go down as communists and not have the stigma or shame that someone would rightly and righteously be understood to have to experience for having thoughts of racism, having racist thoughts. Who doesn't hate racism? Who doesn't hate racists? Everybody can agree on that. The only thing that mucks it up is letting the wrong people decide what is racist or what is racism. Systemic racism? Piffle. Pure piffle. Right now, our system is welcoming people from across the globe into our cities to stay in our hotels. Some of them are pretty nice, I hear. I'm sure not everyone gets a 4-star hotel. Some people are getting phones. Some people are getting cards with money on them or credits to get food. This is how we treat our people of color in this country. So don't talk to me about systemic racism. It's a joke. By that, I mean that there would be some sort of apparatus, legal apparatus, statute that targets and tries to preclude people of a certain race from pursuing their life, liberty, and happiness. It doesn't exist. In fact, it's quite the opposite. There are endless government programs to help people that need help, even if it's their 8th generation of needing help. The government is there to pay for it. So being a racist is worse than being a communist. I certainly feel that would be. If you're going to have something on your gravestone, if you had to pick between the two, communist or racist, I think most people would choose, communist is fine, because God forbid you be labeled a racist, whether you are one or not, even being labeled one. But maybe being a communist is a worse thing than being a racist. There are worse things than being a racist. One of them being a person who forces himself or herself on another person sexually without their consent. I'm trying to avoid saying rapist. I don't know. I think there's certain things you can't say on YouTube, or I don't know. What was I doing? So this, who knows what, if this may be deemed phobic of some kind, this video advocating for the end of racism and giving very clear indications of how racism is pretty much a thing of the past. Certainly in this country. It's over. It really is like watching people trying to hold up a giant deflated bouncy house. They're really struggling to keep that thing up in the air, and it just keeps falling in on them because racism doesn't really exist. Not to the level that it explains. Poverty levels, murder rates, crime levels, out-of-wedlock births, all that stuff that gets blamed on racism, I don't buy any of it. I mean, literally none of it. So it ain't racism. It's gone. And look, to say it's gone is not to say that it wasn't terrible or isn't terrible. Racism's bad, doubtless. But it's just not here. And all the people that are running around, it's like they're chasing commies under the beds in the 50s. They're chasing for something. They're not, they do these demonstrations. They're civil rights reenactors, like those guys that get out there in the uniforms and fire muskets at each other, reenacting the Civil War. That's what they're doing. They're sort of living out their fantasy of what it must have been like to actually have a real cause to get behind and risk life and limb for. I mean, is there any risk at all to saying, I think you need more black people on this thing? Whatever it is. More gay people. More trans people. We need more Pacific Islanders on this production, in this show, at this factory, on the board of directors. We need more women. It's a tool. It's used to divide and grab power, the claims of racism. And I didn't notice it really until just the last few years, since Floyd, really, since George Floyd, Where was I? Race. It's so endless. The thing is, for me, is I'm so tired of hearing other people talk about it. I wish, and yet, how do I talk about it. That's how I process it. I'm tired of it being such a factor in everything. That's it's going to storm this weekend. It's going to be clouds, and we're worried about the underserved communities. Well, pass out some umbrellas then. I don't need to hear about it. Just give me the weather. Underserved communities, you got other things to worry about than getting an umbrella. You're on your 8th generation of poverty. You got to get hustling, man. Thinking in a Dickensian sense, this sort of scorn we're all supposed to feel towards the Ebenezer Scrooge types. Someone who is just strictly concerned with his own immediate issues and no concern for the poor. None. Let them rot. Which, I don't know if that comes from some sort of Judeo-Christian work ethic thing, or if it's because that's the only way, generations before his ancestors had figured out that's the only way you get to be a successful person with good food, warm house, children, by, finding a way, an honest way. Criminality. Whew. Man, try pairing those and the words race in any news story that isn't saying that it's because of racism that there's criminality. Do you believe that? Do you think the crimes, from which I understand, are, very much a disproportionate representation of the races in terms of who's committing the crimes? And by the crimes, I mean the violent crimes, the street crimes, the personal bodily affronts and murders. Who's doing it and who's suffering the most? If you get a chance, check out it's called the Gun Death Memorial or something like that. You'll find it. If you just Google those 3 words, it's staggering to look at that. Look at the cities and just see who's getting murdered out there and who's murdering them. All those teens. Disproportionate, indeed. I don't think racism is the big problem. I think at this point, if you're telling me systemic racism is the real problem for you, you're lying to yourself. If systemic racism is your biggest problem, you don't have problems. Because it doesn't exist. In the community, the problem is not systemic racism. The problem is the teens. In cutting this video, I had a thing in there from a few years ago about is Thanksgiving racist? Who cares? Honestly, who cares? If you care that much about the Indians and their genocide, then give up your house. Sell it and give all the money to the Indians and figure it out. Otherwise, you're just performing. Enough already. Stop ruining everything that's good because you have some sort of need to attain a position of moral superiority or awareness. It's bogus. I don't believe you. Don't believe you. That is the luxury of the privileged, to have the time to sit around and, navel gaze and focus on things like tearing down the patriarchy or the systemic system of white supremacy. If you got time to do that, you don't have problems. Because that's the most BS problem you can have. Particularly if you're living in the hood. Your biggest problem is not systemic racism. Your biggest problem is, a slug coming through your wall and killing a family member. I'm talking the hood, I guess. But not even, because that stuff's spilling out all over. Like in cities, it's no longer in the hood. It's every kid that steals a car and wants to go downtown and bring his gun with him. Every teen. Not every kid. Mostly teens. Oh, by the way, I had a joke or a line in there somewhere in the piece about where I say, here in the 20th century, we understand that people, but I did that intentionally. That was for someone who is listening along and is feeling angry. And yeah, that was for people that are seething and getting angry and listening to it, but just they know that I'm speaking basically truths, trying to be funny about it. Maybe not. Maybe you don't think it's funny, and that's fine too. Yeah, it was for those people that the minute they heard me say that, their heads would snap. Like, aha, see, this guy's an idiot. There you go. He doesn't even know what century he's in, and therefore he's an idiot. And I can feel, that feeling you get when you deal with someone who's just revealed themselves to be a moron. That feeling of like, okay, I don't have to hear another word. I was uncomfortable around this moron for whatever reason, but now he's just, given me everything I need to no longer have to sort of deal with him on that level. I can dismiss everything he does and just try to avoid any more engaging with this moron. So that's why I threw that 20th century thing in there. Like, for them to experience that, they need low fruit on the tree of knowledge. Ah, see, I know that it's the 21st century. Therefore, this guy's an idiot. I don't know. I don't know if it was worth it or not. But that sets me up for the second thing. The second thing is the whole story about Walker's Warbler was pure whole cloth. Nothing to it at all. I made it all up. But it was because I'm sure there are plenty of names for birds that have actually interesting histories and stories behind them that make the bird compelling or unique. If I were a bird watcher and everything was just called bird with blue feathers, long-necked yellow bird, and those are the kinds of names they're going to get. It's less interesting. I mean, when you're out, you're birding, I guess you got your binoculars and your little digital camera and your compass or whatever you bring in your water, and you're with someone, and there's the Steller's jay. And Steller, it turns out, was a politician from New York who made Central Park, and that's where those jays were found, and they were called Steller. I don't know. I don't know what the Steller's jay story is. I know that name's going away, though. And I tell you, my dad used to point out, well, he still does, I would imagine, but like he would always, I never knew what a Steller's jay was till I had my dad point one out, and I could say the same for egrets. I'm a high schooler. I'm being driven, somewhere by my dad. He goes, look over there. There's the egrets. And I don't care. What, egret? What? Who cares? But I know what an egret is now. And I knew then, or I found out then, because some bird fella, my dad, he's not a birder, but just knowing anything at all about birds, it made the birds interesting in a certain sense, It at least made it interesting. Now you can take a novice out, but eliminate any stories that might have come from the bird's name. Although you'll still tell the stories. It'll just be like, oh, back before this was known as a yellow-bellied window thrush, or some dumb thing like that. It used to be known as the scandalous thing. And then maybe it's even more interesting. What is this? The Steller's jay? He was a slave trader who also ran a string of whorehouses? This Steller character? And even if that were true, he was a slave trader who dealt opium to the Chinese. Isn't that kind of a cool thing to know about a bird? Like that it's named after such a character? A character. What a great way to refer to someone who's done terrible crimes against his fellow human beings. And as we remember them, he's a character. This guy was a character. Hitler? Quite a character, that Hitler fella. He used to do this thing where he'd walk into his room and he would pretend to hang up his hat on the hook behind the door, and he would always drop it and pay. He was crazy. What a character. Apparently, YouTube has things about like Hitler-y stuff too. People bleep and blur and put an asterisk on the word Nazi, and they do that word with rape. They do it with rape and Nazi and a couple other words. The N-word, obviously. I can't believe I'm even referring to it as the N-word. It's so dumb. I remember when I first heard that expression, I felt like I was talking to a child. I mean, like an adult child. I'm from a time when, certainly as a matter of it being a word and being a thing and a noun in our language, it could be said in a context that wasn't pejorative, merely discussing it or its usage. Now, if a recording existed of you saying the N-word, Even saying how, like you were quoting someone, George Wallace said, I will never let a blank into the school. I'm just whoever, some famous racist from the past. And you were literally directly quoting them. You'd have to say the word N-word because it's so volatile. The pain and the suffering that word causes, it's an excuse for certain people, certain teens to just lose it. They heard that word said by the wrong person, and that was their justification for why they gunned that person down. It's a license to lose it for some teens, and it is a death sentence if used by the wrong person, someone who doesn't have the card, the pass. There's a joke. I'm just thinking there's a thing called the N-word pass. Yeah, it's called a driver's license. You just roll up the windows and you're good to go. I'm so proud. That could be a joke. In like a suicidal comics act, everybody gets weird as soon as a white guy mentions anything to do with race that isn't simply, being an effusive apologist for the crimes of some previous, and how it stains us all as, that crap. Collective guilt for the father's sins. Could you have two more stupid, ideologies meet and join forces? The sins of the father. Do the sins of the father pass to the son? And of course not. That is level one antithetical to the very basic rights and understandings we give the individual. No one's sins are passed on to you. Yours do not get passed on to anyone else. You are responsible for you. But you take that and then you apply a sort of neo-Marxist group identity collectivism to it. All people of this melanin derivation shall ascribe to these political thoughts so that it can carry the sins of the father. Well, I think we got racism licked, folks. I think we did it. Not even so much us as the people who did it, the generation before. Those people who literally had skin in the game, they got it on paper, which is kind of where it lives. It's there on the paper. It's always going to be there. And that is what's going to rule the day. As long as you live in a society where a society of laws, then you're good. Racism's done. It doesn't exist. Now, racial tension exists. Racial tension exists. And a lot of that racial tension is from racism. But as a race, the only race that's even capable of racism is whites. They're the only ones even capable of it. In this world where Marxist hierarchy of power, the oppressor power, the exploitive, formerly known as capitalist power, but now it's all about oppression. It doesn't even have to be capitalist. It's just those turn out to be nothing more than buzzwords to sort of point at the white evil colonizers who've been running this planet for the last 500 years at least, certainly probably more. But since Columbus in this country, so whether you're a communist or a capitalist, it's still kind of code word for those white oppressors. Not to brag, but there's nobody in my family tree that had slaves. And yet, if reparations go through, what? I got to pay even more money for this thing, and it's going to this guy? Generation 8 over here? Now, if the money were going to be used, if the reparations were going to be paid to someone like Oprah, or I would imagine Don Cheadle probably can handle his money, then I'd be all in favor of it, because they would handle the money right and do something with it. But I don't know about Generation 8. I don't know if they're ready to be given $1 million. How soon would it be until that guy was shot and had his $1 million in someone else's pocket? If everybody got $1 million, everybody. If the long-suffering population of African Americans in California who have endured years of slavery, and if every one of them got $1 million or $2 million or $10 million or whatever it is, I wonder what the net effect of that would be. I hate to think about it, honestly. I think it would be pretty crazy for a while. I get the feeling a lot of that money would be spent on ways that wouldn't help the kind of person who's on their 8th generation of not knowing how to handle money. But, maybe not. Maybe they'd invest wisely. They'd probably, first thing they'd run out and do, guaranteed, is they'd get car insurance because they know they've been driving around without it. Before they couldn't afford it and car insurance was racist, but now they can afford it. So that's the first thing I'm sure they would do with their reparations is run out and get car insurance. And then they would find out they have to have a license. So then they'd backtrack a little bit and go back and try to get a license. But then they get their license, they get their car insurance. That's the first thing they would do with their money. Then they'd invest, buy a nice property somewhere, a couple properties, maybe some income property they could start renting to white people. There'd be no more black tenants. All the downtown dilapidated buildings, as if those exist anywhere anymore, the old warehouses, they could be rented out to white people. The black people would buy them all up and fix them up and make them nice to draw more investors into the community, and then start renting those out to other white. They could rent them out to black people, but black people won't have to rent crap. They'll be buying everything. They'll all have millions of dollars in their pocket. So they can rent out to white people. Now they'd be faced with a real sort of dilemma. Do they maintain the property with their money? Do they keep putting their money into the property and taking the money out of it that they get from the tenants and sinking it back in to keep the property values high? Do they do that? Or do they take this as an opportunity to sort of pay back white people for the legacy of slavery and start cutting off their water and not fixing broken windows? What do you think? What do you think they do? I wonder what these new millionaires would do with all their reparations money to their white tenants. Would they cut off their heat just as a little payback? Come on, for Trayvon or somebody. Payback for that? I really think reparations are so fundamentally stupid. Philosophically, the sins of the father. But financially, I think it would be just such a huge boondoggle that would bring death and murder and financial ruin. And then another generation, it would bring about Generation 9. Giving Generation 8, it's $12 million. What would that do to a price of rims? If everybody had $12 million, but there was only 300 sets of rims that anybody wanted, like Jordans, what would a set of Jordans cost if everybody in California who's black got some sort of payout? Do you know what that would do to a price of Jordans? And that's not, of course, certain people are going to think that's a racist joke, but it's literally based on market and demand, What that would do to a pair of Jordans when everybody has endless money to outspend the other guy to actually get them. Oh my God. And that goes for everything. Inflation. Man, I wish I knew what else black people liked so I could have more analogies, but I'm not an authority. Yeah, reparations is a bad idea. I mean, real racism, just being like the hatred of someone by virtue of the skin. Like, I can't like that person because of their skin color. I don't know anybody that thinks that way. I don't know if I've ever met anyone that can't be cordial or friendly or befriend someone of some other skin color. I've never in my life met someone who seemed to really say that was where their racism lived. So racism has had to be redefined. It's a state that you're born into now. Racism is no longer a choice or a belief. It is something, it's what they say assigned at birth. If you're white, you're assigned racist at birth. You can change your gender, but if you're white, you cannot change your racist assignation. Assigned at birth racism is just BS. I'm talking about real racism, hating someone or seeking to impede their success. Oh, I don't think I'm going to hire this person because of the color of their skin. And not only am I not going to hire this person, I'm going to make sure nobody hires this person. I'm going to try to have laws passed or make it okay to not hire this person or rent to this person or allow them to live next to you or have a car or, keep their children based on their skin color. That's absurd. That doesn't exist. Hasn't for a very long time. Very long time. So, again, which is why racism has to be shifted into this sort of amorphous thing that is everywhere, and nothing can be done about it, but we all have to work and toil to get rid of it, Nope, whites are always going to be racist, but we have to spend our lives toiling against our birthright, Robin DiAngelo nonsense. And that's the sins of the fathers. That's why reparations is stupid. It's posturing morality, posing as, the word's really been overplayed. And it's a great word, but it is kind of a grift, A lot of people make money off of this crap. And it's crap. Make no doubt about it. It's crap. There's nobody in this country being held back because of their race. That's irrefutable. And there are endless resources and opportunities and programs to the exclusion of others based on race. So racism has to change because that's the only way the voodoo works. If that thing can be held out there as a threat and a cudgel to elicit behavior, collectivist behavior from people wherein everything is going to be paid for out of a tax bucket that we all have to fill, and it will be distributed based on the color of one's skin, distributed racially, that cannot exist. Racism, if it's practiced at all, between the races, overt crimes of racism, you don't want to know the statistics on it. the way it actually shakes out. But I'll give you ballparks, The rate at which crimes are perpetrated from one race on the other, whether it's murder or violent crime or robbery, the rates at which white perpetrators rain that upon a black victim is dwarfed, midgeted, if I can use, I don't know if that's kind of funny. It's midgeted. Just the guy who goes out of his way to sort of use a provocative, phobic word. Oh my God, the rate at which whites are the perpetrators of crimes against blacks, violent crimes, is midgeted by the opposite, on the order of double digits to 1. So, you don't want that to be the metric of how we distribute our goods in this country or ascribe worth, That thing, colorblindness, I think it's the way to go, folks. All this stuff where it's about racial identity, that's only going to cause problems. Because if you really want to break stuff down and have things ascribed to people based on their race, whites are oppressors, blah, 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 I don't think that's going to make the other races come out looking too good. Crime statistics being one of them. If you want to measure the worthiness of a race by its contribution to the society, if we want to get into that level of dividing people, which I do not suggest we do, I don't think having a system based on racial merit or guilt is the way to go. Colorblindness gives everybody a shot, regardless of his or her race, to find success in life here in the U.S., where you have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Colorblindness is the best option for that. It's not even the fairest in some respects, in that, it gets into equity issues and about resources and stuff, but if it's based on, if it were to be based on the contributions to society, no. It's kind of like, it's like when you're talking to a fat guy that won't put down the donuts, so you keep hinting at him, hey, maybe you shouldn't eat the donut, And he's got his mouth packed with donuts, and he's like, why? And, you're sitting there looking at a guy who's 300 pounds or more. It's a donut. And he's, probably, well, what's wrong with donuts? Jams another one in his face. He's goading you into saying the thing. And the thing is, because eating those donuts makes you a fat slob, he's goading you into saying it. Racism and race stuff is kind of similar. You don't want to goad people into discussing the accomplishments and achievements and contributions of the various races in this country and then start passing out or having their value as members of society being ascribed based on that, because it doesn't look good for the victims, Generation 8. Not a lot of contribution going on there. A lot of cultural stuff, but look at all the other stuff. Academics, science, technology, automation, manufacturing. It's not a lot going on in terms of certain racial groups' accomplishments. And of course, the reason is because of racism, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, okay. Tell that to Oprah. Tell Oprah she suffered from racism. If it weren't for racism, instead of $4 billion, Oprah might have $5.8 billion. But that damn racism. It's a boogeyman. And they kind of goad you. You either get labeled a racist. If you want to talk real stuff about race and race relations, as a oppressor, you're only allowed to come at it from a certain angle, lest you be, torn to shreds. You're more likely to actually be torn to shreds by a street thug than torn to shreds by a mob of, leftist cancelers. But the figurative torn to shreds is bad enough that you shouldn't have to endure it. But you will be torn to shreds if you say the wrong thing in that area. If you have something to lose, or if you're, mostly they turn that on themselves. That kind of person, you can call a Klansman a Nazi or a racist all you want, and he doesn't care. Those are words that are used to control people. People that actually have those beliefs don't care that they get called those things. The people who care about those words and not wanting to be called those words, they don't have the philosophies and ideologies of those words inside them, but they're terrified of being called them. So it's to live in fear. Whites are asked to live in fear of being able to talk about race. Lest they be called a racist, the worst thing you can be. Except for, there's got to be if we all put our heads together, there's countless things that are worse. How about being a child molester? Isn't that worse than being a racist? How about being someone who swindles some old lady out of her money so that she dies, alone in some public hospital? Isn't that person worse than someone who hates Filipinos? Someone who just hates Filipinos? Some racist guy who hates Filipinos? Maybe he's Indonesian, but that racist guy it's not as bad as the guy who, knew he was producing a shoddy product for a massive construction dam that the dam eventually did break and killed, 22,000 people when it flooded a valley. That guy's worse than just your garden variety racist, because that's all you're going to find here. There's the whack jobs who load up them and their 4 buddies into a van and step outside and wave their swastika before they're attacked by everyone around them. There's those racists, and then that's it. The rest of your sort of garden variety people who they might have some ideas you don't agree with, but they're not going to say them and be punished for not believing what you believe. It's not worth it for them. It's a means of social control. The whole thou shalt not N-word, thou shalt genuflect before the statue of George Floyd and sit around wringing your hands before your big corporate meetings talking about how the only reason we're able to do this is because of the oppressors who took this land from the native tribes who once roamed here, but will never again have this land because we've built these towers on it. My brother-in-law works at a place where before their meetings, he's in sales, before their meetings, they do this thing because of where the building is. They do this whole ritual. If there's more than 7 people in the meeting, they have to do this sort of group acknowledgement of the native tribes that once occupied that land. It's ridiculous. As if all land wasn't once occupied by previous generations of other people who had it rough, to say the least. I think everybody has it rough. Every race, every people, every nation, they have it rough. At some point in their development, they have it rough. The trick is to get out of the rough stuff. Start making the world around you better so that things aren't so bad. Let's build an aqueduct instead of sitting out here in the desert chasing bugs or getting eaten by tigers. Let's build an aqueduct. We'll grow some plants. We won't have to hunt buffalo, or we'll start putting our brains together and improve ourselves. Every people goes through that. Some people are, being confronted with it. It's thrust upon them. Often that's what happens. The more dominant culture, the more advanced culture thrusts it upon their neighboring cultures or the cultures that they've engaged on the other side of the globe. There are still societies where people walk around half naked and drag their stuff, on their back, chasing monkeys through trees or whatever they're doing. I don't know. National Geographic type places. They probably have cell phones as well, but that's the way they live. They live in mud huts. They go down to the stream or the garbage pile and they look for what they're going to make the most of that day. People live like that. You just sort of see things in different focus and perspectives, and you realize, turns out maybe handing tons of welfare to people creates generational poverty. I don't know, and that would go for anybody that's on that. That would be the people we always called it Appalachia, but apparently now it's Appalachia. They're on their multi-generational, and maybe that's it. Maybe maybe that's always going to be there. Maybe there's nothing you can do if your culture is on its 8th generation of poverty or more. And I guess much of the sort of kind of so-called white trash of that region of the country, they were white trash when they came from Scotland. And, those parts where they came from, they were the sort of uneducated and often uneducatable poor who they weren't ready to be like mature citizens. They would disobey the law and be public nuisances. In a way, they sort of live unto their own code, but there are people that sort of don't participate in that directly, but live on its fringes and are fine doing that. And that goes way back. There have always been kind of poor that would rather be thieves than figure out some way before they die to actually make an honest living. Which has got to be hard to do once you've started thieving, because until you're caught, it must be a revelation. Your first couple of, when you first steal things or maybe when you first kill someone, it's like, wow, this is so much easier than I thought it would be. I thought there'd be other, fears or, no, this is easy. I can just shoot someone and take their stuff, and it's not hard at all. I've been doing it since I was 7. There's a certain unfixability that can come with certain people. And maybe the people in poor Appalachia are the white version of that. I know Thomas Sowell says that a lot of the sort of indigence that gets ascribed to, by terrible racists, of course, that would only say this, but that indigent scofflaws of the old South that were black, they learned that from living with these Scots-Irish, trash people, basically, is what people would have called them 5 or 10 years ago. They're just trash people. That culture of not really consenting to being governed, and, which is, if that doesn't describe your street teen, I don't know what does. Those guys live in their own world where there's no laws, no parental control, certainly. But that seems to come from, according to Thomas Sowell, their Africans' exposure to white Southern culture, the sort of lesser, the white trash. The penchant for laziness and theft and criminality and the unwillingness to be governed, all of that stuff that seems to be kind of a problem for certain people. It always seems to roll downhill, like when you take someone who's been educated or taught manners and you put them amongst people who are dumb and ill-mannered. It takes a master sort of centered person to be able to survive with manners in that kind of world. It's just easier to just adapt and go sort of downgrade your level of being governed and your acceptance of criminality. And with it, all the cool talk, all the cool slang you get from it. JJ, he'll say things to me in an email, usually. And it's some word that I have to look up because I don't know what it means. It's some word that all the kids are using. And it's, slang. You can't have a culture based on slang. I mean, you can, but there's no permanence to it. How do you tell your children how to assemble a rocket or a microwave oven or anything if your entire language is built up with slang and idioms that will lose their timeliness? That's it. That's your language, yo. Well, okay, that's great. You have that, and black people get a lot of credit for, they're just, but okay, your language of 20 years ago is maybe 30, 40 years ago, but it's useless. Nothing has come out of it of any worth to explain anything that we might need. And that goes for like philosophy and math. It's like you have to have standards. The reason, it's why white people are so boring and they're just, it's their job to make sure that we can write stuff down so that, 10 years from now, anything makes any sense to us. And it's got to be in a standard English with rules of grammar and punctuation. Yeah. Read Black Twitter. That's what our education is turning out. That's what our education system is turning out. Read Black Twitter. I can't even understand half of what's being said. There's just, in a lot of stuff. Especially look at some of the stuff on more hip-hop oriented sites. I don't know what's being said. Don't know what the language is. I recognize words that are spelled differently and capitalized for reasons I can't understand. And it'd be like a code language, but it'll be useless by next year because nobody's going to be speaking that code anymore. And there's no permanence to it. You don't get to hand down anything to your children and your next 8 generations without some sort of standard acceptable levels of reading and writing and math. And guess who's not doing so great at that? Racism is to blame. Well, I don't know. I have no other big picture for this after party that wasn't at least hinted at in the piece. There was another chunk I cut out about the idea that people today want, based on someone's race, they want them to pay for what happened during the Civil War, or before the Civil War, before slavery. And anyone that has a Confederate flag is somehow an avowed racist. That's nuts. And I left in the part about how there would be other reasons either anyone on either side might be fighting other than just whether or not slavery was their issue. And I really don't think slavery was the issue for a lot of guys in the conflict. But what came out of it was like, well, if you think everybody in a gray hat was an ardent pro-slavery person, and you feel everyone in a blue hat was an ardent warrior and crusader against the scourge of slavery. Well, that explains why you think everybody in a red hat is some sort of rabid racist. And by red hat, I mean like a MAGA hat. And I had a whole thing about the MAGA hat. Remember those guys, those high school kids that kind of stood their ground and got in a stare down with some Native Americans, and how that was this huge story of like this sort of unrepentant racism of the MAGA hat crew, and that turned out to be not what was happening there at all. That there was a whole other dynamic going on with I think some black Israelites were there causing problems, and it was just, but no, it was guys in a red hat who had committed the sin of wearing the red hat, and legitimately, people just presumed that these kids are like the most vicious, the worst people in the world, which would be racists, entitled white teen racists. And it was just based on the kid kind of nervously smiling at a guy about whatever was going on in that moment. And it was just that, if you think if you think that everybody fought in the gray uniform was fighting for slavery and everybody in the blue was fighting against it, that's why you might think everyone in a red hat is a racist or a phobe or whatever. But I found myself sort of in the position of defending MAGA hats, which I wasn't a Trump supporter. I could never vote for that man, but I never cared about the hat. I just feel like if somebody wants to wear a hat, let him wear the stupid red hat. If somebody wants to vote for Trump, let him vote for Trump. I don't care. But that's now a measure of someone's, just if you're someone that has voted for Trump in the eyes of so many Democrats, if you voted for someone like Trump, you literally are the contemporary equivalent of a pipe smoking, shirtless Southern slave owner whipping his boy who's tied to a pillar, and you're drunk. And you're going to whip him with your whip and go rape his women and sell off his children, one of which you may be the father of. You're literally that if you wear a MAGA hat, which is just nuts. That's like a level of delusional, that can only come from being fed and encouraged to align along with some really twisted stuff. And it's got to be a steady diet of twisted, nutty thoughts from a pretty young age. MAGA hat means you're the guy that dragged somebody behind your Jeep with a rope. That's what a MAGA hat means. No, it's not. It's not what it means. It's just not. That's not to say that someone who might enjoy such activities might not also wear a MAGA hat, but that makes about as much sense as a kid in a hoodie and skinny jeans is a murderous carjacking, ne'er-do-well. Maybe they are. But you would never go along with sort of labeling someone in that attire as a societal scourge and deserving to have their hoodie ripped off their back and kicked in the ass like might happen to someone who wore a MAGA hat in Seattle or San Francisco. So I cut out a whole MAGA hat thing and a bunch of other stuff. But I left in 9 attempts at saying the N-word in the John Lennon bit. So you got to make choices. You got to make tough choices. I don't suppose anyone's still listening. I'm probably going to wrap this up. I'll probably have to do more of this kind of stuff down the line, and I'm already prepared for it. It's a low percentage topic. To a point. I imagine there's enough people out there who might be amused by what I have to say about some of this stuff, but it's probably pretty low percentage. This one's probably going to do about as well as the one I did on Gaza and Israel. But I try to do what I think is funny. Ugh. It's never supposed to get to this. I made some mistakes, but I did my best. That's not what stand-up's supposed to be. This isn't stand-up, but this is the kind of stuff I do in stand-up. By that I mean jokes like you might have seen in the End of Racism video. Thanks for watching.
Give it up for the stylings. The stylings of Jimmy Fields.